Okay, there's something I would like us to talk about, which is speaking in tongues. It's a particular way of talking, which is I don't know whether Duane is employing that in his works, writing in tongues or speaking in tongues. Okay, after reaching so much farther than the religionists, so would the new man speak in a more complex tongues than those who profess to speak in tongues? We have people who go into what you call prayer, and they reach certain levels of paroxysm, and they start making some incantations. Say they are speaking in tongues. Can the new man's language be a kind of speaking in tongues?
Okay, so that's the question, and yes, I'm familiar with this, but I don't know everything, of course, but I can see it. But so your idea of this is the end result is speaking in tongues. That's the idea. And what would be your definition of that, Charles, your experience?
Well, my experience of this phenomenon is I will go back to religion, where I witnessed this, where people prayed. In fact, while I was there, I was unable to pray. I would try to compose the words, and they would never form. So I used to at I don't know whether it's at that time it was admiration for these people who were sort of prayer warriors, and at certain points they will, I don't know whether I was feigning, pretending to have reached certain states of awareness, and then certain revelations will be coming to them, and they will be speaking in tongues in a strange language, or so they will be uttering some incomprehensible words, and which was considered to be a sign of maybe contact with the spirit or something like that. You see, so I want to ask whether the new man can expatiate on this and see whether and also tell us whether there's an aspect of speaking in tongues in his presentation.
Well, again, these are old references, but really what they are is they're just, again, it's all about control, isn't it? It's all about ritualism, and it's the same thing. It's under the influence of creation. So it's another sound good aspect that the elites have created to get the interest of people. And you see it today in everything. You know, they're always doing something to continually market people, bringing something out that seems to be new and different and better when it's really worse. Okay, according to the all-natural environment that really supports us. So keeping the attention going. So again, anything of the ancients that has been brought forward as traditional or whatever the idea is, okay, this is how it's been, or this is holy, or this is divine, or, you know, it's always been so, etc. Even the love idea, all these things. Again, it's all about control. That's all it is. It's all about control. And again, there's Harry on stage talking about these things, etc. And the religions of the world and the Pope and all these things. The governments do the same thing. They do it in their own way. They just tweak it a little bit so it looks political, but it's all really from religious sacrifice, because this is human farming and everything here involves sacrifice. That's the bottom line. So no matter what is said or what have you, but it's very simple, and that is that, again, what I've created is references, and the speaking in different tongues, well, again, it seems to be a big phenomena that enhances people. It's like when you watch the TV evangelists, and they do the supposed laying on of hands, and then everybody starts jittering and shaking and flipping on the floor and all these things, okay, because they got the power of God or whatever. Again, it's nuts, isn't it? It's a type of ritualism. And the speaking of tongues, it's the same thing. It sounds like a really cool idea, but really, where does it lead to? It's really nonsense. It keeps people in nonsense. Anything from the past, unless it's seen as a reference to something better, is nonsense, because it goes nowhere. Because, again, how does it make sense to where civilization bases itself upon a traditional past to where the present and the future get worse? How does that make sense? It doesn't. Go ahead, Charles.
Okay. Now, I would like to ask this. Have an explanation. Again, I would use a past reference. Paul Tucher once gave an idea of how spirit passes on its messages, warnings, and admonitions to humans. He talked about the golden tongue wisdom. Now, in the new nowness life is, how does the all-is communicate with all life, apart from the physical presence of the new manis, the new waves? Is there a new nowness communication modus operandi? Because Portugal had his golden tongue wisdom, and now the new man is on the scene. So how does the all-is communicate then with all life, you know, apart from your presence here, the books we are reading, and the words we are hearing, the videos we are watching, and all the like. So what other means can we recognize, can we perceive this communication?
Well, again, when you present that idea, it's in a literal sense, which is understandable. And again, many people will want to have it literally explained or read it and define it. And so again, you use the right word there. It's a three-letter word, had. Okay, Paul had this, Paul had that. Yes, it's all past. And the word he used, which I'm familiar with, modus operandi, he just used a variety of words, okay, of a particular, and the golden tongue wisdom and all these things like this. Well, again, these are really, he was giving hints. And so these things, these ideas, like any ideas, have become literalized to where, just like, let's say Jesus did say, listen for the word. Okay, it's written in the Bible, but we know who wrote the Bible. But let's just say that he actually said that, and he did recognize something at the time. Well, now that word idea has become literal, you see? And it's very subtle, and so it's become control. And, even Paul's works, even though people read it, they don't understand that it's in the area of control right now and restriction. It has nothing to do with the nowness, because again, and you ask about communication, this is very interesting. All right, so it's not communicating literally. This is what people are looking for. It's not in the literal sense. So again, it's like communicating with the sun. What would your idea be about communicating with the sun shining, the reality that it is? Okay, would it be the same communication in a literal sense? But you would try to make it that, wouldn't you? And you would invent something, maybe a little gadget or something, or some ideas or whatever, saying, well, this is what you do to communicate with this. All right. When we do the new you, all right, that's called the real connection, is what that is. It's a connection, just like you connect with Skype, is what it is. You're making the connection. All right. And so what would you imagine the best you can to be the communication with an Isssnesss that is pure perfection that you cannot even imagine? So what would you imagine the communication to be? You see? So again, that's one aspect of looking at it. So I don't see it as communication. I see it as like the air we breathe. In other words, it's an endlessness that only you can decide to recognize or discover, okay? And through that becomes what I call perceiving. That would be your idea of communication. In other words, you perceive what already is. Okay, so it's not about that, like the old saying, oh, well, I heard voices and God spoke to me and all this stuff. Yeah, we do hear those things, and the boys do say certain things. They do communicate, but that's not what they're really talking about. These are just things to get us to the point where we eventually recognize this true reality for ourselves, but it's not in accordance with any literal sense, this communication. No, because you don't need it. When you're standing in perfection, what do you need to communicate? You see, that communication is only in accordance, this idea is in accordance with the personal self. But in your real awareness, you don't need it. So you decide to stand in your real awareness with the is, or you decide to stay with your literal self and try and figure out the pure reality the Isssnesss life is. You see, you decide that. And this is where, again, what do people pray for? They're praying for God to decide for them. They're looking for the government to decide for them. That's why they keep agreeing to be controlled, because they want to be controlled by the controllers, and they expect the controllers to control them and give them their wishes at the same time. It's all kind of a funny deal. But what's so cool about the real universes and the Isssnesss is that, no, it's none of this. Because as you look at it just from a literal sense, what you're doing is you're incorporating restriction to what you've decided. Is that what you want? You see, it's your choice. So yeah, this is the big figuring out. In other words, this is the jumping point to where, all I can do is provide the best references possible. And that's all I can do. But the rest of it is up to you. And so again, watch how your mind works to where it will be self-convinced to understanding it and taking it literally, which then again, no, you're not seeing it because it's not that. So the idea of communication, that's with the personal self, okay? And yes, the guides do communicate with us, and people will have experiences with Rebazar and the boys and whatever, and they think, okay, well, I'm there, I'm with them. Realistically, no, you're not. Anybody, a policeman can come up to you on the street and start talking to you, and you can think, oh, the police are protecting me. Well, realistically, they're not. Just because you talk to a policeman, again, so the guides cannot protect you from yourself. This is where, again, people want to guarantee. There's a better position, and that is that to where you recognize what life is, to where you don't need protection. I would say that's a lot better. But that's up to you to see that. It's a scene. You see, it's so cool. And so these are the steps we go through. So the communication aspect, again, you're thinking in terms of a literal communication, basically. So it's not that. It's not that at all. But it is, that's part of it, but it's not the whole. It's not the absolute. The only thing that's absolute is the endlessness. The isness is. That's the only absolute. In creation, there are no absolutes. Again, it's like in freedom here, the idea of freedom. There's no freedom here. It's all implied. There's no nothing here. It's all implied. That's all it can be because you have cause and effect. You cannot eliminate cause and effect from creation because that's what creation is. And it's all okay. Once you see it, you can see it, what a benefit it is because it helps you wake up to recognize this true reality. That's what's so cool about it. But in the meantime, we kind of get stuck with ideas of good and bad, right and wrong, what is better than the other. No, the idea is that you have this reference to see, and you apply it according to what you cannot see and what you cannot define. How do you do that? You see, that's the whole of life. It cannot be seen, but yet you can learn to see it realistically. So it's far out. It's the experience is far out, and all I can do is hint at it. But it's not what you think. It never is. It's never that. But here we need reference points. We need stop signs at the corner so people stop and don't crash into each other. So we learn to see the difference between creation and the true reality. Well, what did Paul do? He created the God Worlds chart where he kind of mashed it all together. Well, again, this was the elementary stage. Paul presented the elementary side. It was like first, second, third, fifth grade, whatever. That's as far as he went with that. That's as far as he could go because that's all people could take. And even those that are there, they didn't see it. Who squeaked through that? You see? So the thing being is that he mashed it all together. Now, what I've done is given people the opportunity to where you basically separate it, but it's all the same thing, but separating it, providing this demonstration so they can get a better objective view of what is needed to recognize this true reality. Because what Paul presented, no matter what he said in the books, it really basically refers to a literal point of view. Literalizing the spiritual idea. He worked off of that. And spiritual stuff is basically physical, astral. It's literal. And the spiritual exercises to see the light, hear the sound, basically the light, well, that's the knowledge off the astral realm. That's all it was. And he started off with astral projection, which is fine. It really doesn't matter because all of creation is the same. We break it down to physical, astral, causal, mental, etheric. Well, it's all the same. It's all here now. It's really all the same. There's no upper or lower. Just like in the business world, is the CEO better than the janitor? No, I would say not. They're all the same. They're just playing their roles. So there really is no upper or lower. But the controllers who are controlled, they like to project these ideas onto the masses so that they are controlled, so that they're constantly striving for something that isn't there, which makes them project a future into more lifetimes of being controlled. It's very interesting how it works. It's very subtle, but as you see how this all works, etc., you see that it's not what it is. And the Isssnesss life is, it already is what it is. So you work off of that. So if it already is what it is, what is it? So it's not something that you can add to it, like I've said. No matter what you think about it, you're trying to add to it. No, that's not it. You can think whatever you want about the sun shining, and it's still, that's not it, is it? No, that's not it. So how do you see this? How do you learn to see this to where it does make sense? And that, all of a sudden you recognize, you see, oh, now I see what this is. And those that stand real with it, well, they do step up and do something because this is the adventure. But most people are looky-loos, okay? So they collect the so-called references, which they think are great knowledge, etc. And that's why people in the world like David Icke and Tony Robbins and whoever else is out there, the movie stars, whatever, they get most of the attention. Because, again, they know how to work phenomena. And that's all it is. It goes nowhere, absolutely nowhere. People collect the knowledge and they think they've got this or that. Well, again, they become self-convinced. It has nothing to do with the Isssnesss life is, so they have a good life, etc. Again, it's a literal world. People have been taught to be literal, so they're controlled. Yes.